Hey there, folks. Welcome back to Nome and Beyond, part two
It's part two.
of the how, why
Bye.
we went to Nome, Alaska. That craziness out of my system. Here's a quick moment of Zen. And now on to February 2020. So in February, we knew she matched to Nome, and we knew at least she was going to Nome, and we had to make a decision. Was I going to come with, or was she going to stay there for a year and come back? At the time, we didn't realize that she was going to go on to a postdoc. It was only supposed to be a year engagement up in Nome and then done. But we kind of got the Alaska bug and decided that we would both move up to Alaska and then see if, like, after that was done, we couldn't find somewhere else in Alaska to move to and just kind of make Alaska our permanent home. So with that, we kind of started to strategize what that move would look like. And this kind of brings us into March. By this time, we had decided we were going to move to Nome, and we had some decisions to make. What do we do with our house? We had to decide what we were going to keep and what we were going to get rid of. We also needed to figure out how we were going to get our stuff to Nome. Another thing we had to figure out was where we were going to live. More on that later. And probably the biggest one for me is what was I going to do for employment. As soon as I knew she matched and we decided that I wanted to go with, I started to, beg my leadership to allow me to work remote from Alaska. And they were a little hedgy right out of the gate. I mean, to me, it didn't make a big difference. While I worked in the office most days, I still worked essentially with people that were in different geographical areas. So we were on the phone a lot anyway, and doing screen shares and that kind of thing, and instant messaging a lot of the time. So it wouldn't have been that much difference as far as I could see, other than not being able to be in the room if there are meetings going on. So I asked, and throughout March, I didn't get any answers, even though I kind of kept bugging my leadership. And towards the end of the month, I started to get a little bit of kind of a positive, yeah, I think it might work, yada, yada, yada. And we also started packing. We had to figure out what we were going to keep. I got rid of, like, old electronics. I had a bunch of old computers that were defunct. I had old, like, computers from like early 80s, mid 80s, like Commodore 64s and VIC 20s and stuff like that no longer worked. I got rid of those. We got rid of stuff that we just didn't use anymore. Like, if you hadn't used it within a year, why are you keeping it, kind of thing. So we got rid of all sorts of stuff that had just kind of been stuffed in the attic space, or that was like in my desk drawers, like old paperwork and just stuff that I had printed out back when I was getting my master's degree, like just stuff that I no longer needed, really. And that kind of took us through April, trying to see if my leadership would let me work remote, getting the house ready, those kind of things. In April, I got an answer about my work remote request, and the answer was no. The VP of the company at that time decided he didn't want to allow that. Really kind of bummed me out, because I really liked and still like working for this company because I'm still with them. But that bummed me out, because I was like, well, now I got to start looking for a job. I can't be with my wife for a year. It was kind of like a negative time in my life that spun me into a bit of a depression. So because they weren't going to let me work remote and I wanted to go to Alaska with my wife, I started applying for jobs. I applied for anything that I could find that was remote. I applied for things in Anchorage, things in Fairbanks, thinking that, well, I can just fly to Nome and back on the weekends, or she can fly to wherever I land on the weekends, kind of thing. I applied for some jobs in Nome. They would have paid significantly less, but it would have gotten us up into Nome, and we could at least be together. I applied for Child Protective Services job, which would have been a nightmare for me. I don't know that I am equipped to deal with some of the things that you see when you're in that job, so I'm kind of glad I didn't get it. I even got scammed. I applied for a job with Amazon, a remote job, and as part of the interview process, they suggested that I would likely get hired if I knew a certain way of doing IT projects. And so I bought this, I guess, module or training module. I can't remember how much I paid for it. And it was something that would have been useful anyway, regardless of this job or not. But as time went on and I had a screening interview, I started to get really suspicious that it was a scam. The guy that I did the screening interview with, I barely understand him. Just the thickest accent, didn't understand what I was saying half the time, and the connection was so bad that it was an impossible interview to have. After that interview, I really was like, this is a scam. So I contacted them and I accused this of being a scam, and they're like, no, 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 we're not a scam, no, 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 no. And the more I looked at it, and when I got my materials, the book that came for it was essentially printed off pieces of paper. Like, it wasn't horrible, but it didn't look like high professional quality stuff. So I said, you're a scam. I want my money back, or I'm going to go to the Better Business Bureau. And they're like, don't do that. And I was like, well, then give me my money back. So I got my money back, believe it or not. And they said, just ship the stuff back to us that we sent you. So I went to UPS, and the cost to ship that stuff back was almost the same cost that I spent on it in the first place. So I didn't ship it back. And I did report them to the Better Business Bureau. And then I eventually threw out the workbooks and the stuff that they had sent me. And unfortunately, nothing that I was interviewing with was really catching on. There was one really promising interview I had for a place up in Anchorage, and they were really excited about me and my background, and like really close, I think, to pulling the trigger, but they didn't want me to work from Nome. And the whole living in Anchorage versus her in Nome and paying rent in two places and all that really started to, sour me on the idea of doing that kind of weekend commute thing. So ultimately they didn't hire me because they wanted me to be local in Anchorage, and I didn't want to do that. The other thing we had to figure out in April was where we were going to live, or at least she was going to live, until I could find my way up there. And one thing you got to realize about Nome is that housing is at a premium up there. It is hard to find housing. One of the things you need to know if you're going to move to Nome is where you're going to live before you get to Nome, or you're going to spend a lot of money staying in a hotel until something opens up that you can find. It's very, very difficult to find housing in Nome. Or I was able to connect with the interns, the various interns that were currently up there, and through that group was able to connect with someone that hadn't found a new renter for their place, and so she was able to make a deal to say, okay, I'll take that over, and got the lease sent to her and signed the lease so that when she took over, everything was above board or what have you. It was a month-to-month rent kind of deal, so no big deal. If something else better popped up, she could move, but she had something lined up and we didn't have to worry about that, which was nice to have one more stressor taken off our shoulders. In May, we got more serious about packing the house. This is the point where Ora really had to go through her stuff and determine what she wanted, what she didn't want, so I could pack that up, get that out of the way, so that when she left in June, I was able to get rid of everything she didn't want and clear the house up. I didn't want to make those decisions without her, so I had to kind of, you got to make these decisions, figure it out, let's figure this out, let's pack up what you want. And so we packed up a lot of her art supplies, some of her clothes, and other things that she didn't want to get rid of. That was really May. It was just a lot of, let's figure out what we don't want, what we need to get rid of. By this time, we had really squared away what Aura was going to keep from the house, and we were starting to pack her suitcases in the early part of the month. Suitcases have to be under 100 pounds, so we packed and repacked 10 suitcases for her to bring up to Nome. Mind you, we're thinking we're moving up there permanently, so we tried to bring as much stuff up for the year and that we would use, of course, going forward after that year, not knowing when we'd be able to afford to grab the stuff that we kept from the house and get it shipped up there. And we didn't want to ship it up to Nome because then we'd have to ship it out of Nome when we moved, say, to Anchorage or Fairbanks or somewhere else in the state. So we're packing that stuff up, filling up suitcases. She had some art supplies, some food stuffs that you couldn't get up there at the time we were doing keto, so she packed a bunch of keto specific stuff. We didn't know much about like how stuff gets shipped up to Nome and how long it takes. Plus she was going to have to quarantine for 15 days or 2 weeks or whatever when she got up there because COVID was, popping at this time. On June 15th, we got up early. We loaded her suitcases into the truck. We loaded one of the dogs into the truck. And I took Aura to the airport. We got all of her suitcases checked in. We had the dog ready to get on the plane, which we had to register as an emotional support animal in order to let her fly in the cabin with us because we weren't going to put her in cargo. And I walked kind of up through the security with her up until kind of the first bend and then just kind of stepped back and watched her go through the lines and get through security. And she got everything together, got her backpack all put back together, got the dog all buckled back up, and waved goodbye. I think she was crying a little, and she walked off to find her gate. So I turned around, left, and went home. But I wasn't home for very long, because that same day my dad was going in for his third heart valve transplant. So I went home, I grabbed our other dog, and ran to Eau Claire, Wisconsin, dropped the dog off with my mother-in-law, and went to the hospital to be with my family while my dad was having his third heart valve surgery. The rest of the month really entailed me chauffeuring my mom back and forth between their lake home where they lived and the hospital in Eau Claire, which is about a 75-minute drive. Less the way I drive, but it would be a 75-minute drive if you did the speed limit. And we would do like maybe a half hour, 45-minute visit. I would leave the dog out in the truck in the parking ramp with the truck on, AC cranking. And that's what we would do every day for about 2 weeks. I brought her back and forth. So essentially the month of June, the last half of the month of June was shot for as far as doing anything around the house and getting the house ready to sell. So now we're in July and I continue to pressure my work to allow me to work remote and still not getting any answers. The responses were kind of lukewarm positive now that everyone was working remote anyways due to COVID, but I still wasn't getting anything solid. I also, during July, had to take some time to go stay up at the lake home with my dad after he'd been released from the hospital because he had complications from his surgery, which made him unable to walk. So I had to kind of bump around the house and help him out with things he couldn't do, help him like make food, adjust his pillow, help him get to the bedroom to get into bed, that kind of stuff. I can't remember where my mom was. She was doing something at that time. She was gone. But I had to do that for maybe a week. I don't think it was 2 weeks. It was probably a week. And then I asked my brother, hey, man, you got to come help out because I got to get our house packed up. At the time, we had hoped to get it on the market around end of August, early September. So I had basically a month left, a month and a half maybe, to get the house all shored up, empty, painted, everything else done. So my brother did help out. A couple of my friends, who are really kind of more like family, helped out a lot. So thank you all for doing that, because this was an ultra stressful time trying to figure out what I'm going to do, trying to get the house gone, trying to help my wife. She was having issues with insurance and a pharmacy, a remote pharmacy, because her phone kept dropping because her Verizon signal up in Nome was crap. So every time she'd get on there, they'd put her on hold for 10 minutes, and then about halfway through that, the call would drop. So she just couldn't seem to actually carry on a full phone conversation with them. So I'm making all the phone calls trying to figure that out while driving my mom back and forth, while trying to worry about the house and get contractors set up and pack, and dealing with a dog that all ended up getting stress colitis from all the moving around. Yeah, it was just, it was like the height of anxiety for me at that point. So now we're into August. Still no word about my job. This is when I was continuing to empty out the house and trying to get rid of junk. My buddy had something from one of his restaurants he had to ditch, so he had a lift truck, so we loaded it full of garbage from my house. I think we had an old mat, our mattress and our box spring and stuff that nobody would take. A bunch of junk from the garage, junk from the basement, just stuff that you couldn't get rid of, nobody would want. I was also dealing with contractors. I had painters, which were really goofy because they would show up at 5, 6 o'clock at night rather than come during the day like normal contractors would. They would bring their kids sometimes. I had run out for some reason, and I came back and I went into the freezer to eat some food. I think it was corn dogs or something like that. I was living on microwavable food because I didn't have a lot of dishes. I think I had a plate, a bowl, and one of each pieces of cutlery, fork, knife, spoon kind of thing, and one cup. But anyways, I went into my freezer and I had corn dogs in there, and I noticed it. I hadn't opened the package yet. I went into it and it was open, and there were some corn dogs missing. The contractors just helped themselves because their kids were hungry. I was like, I don't have time to deal with trying to find a new contractor and get these guys out of here and yada yada yada. So I just let it go. Come on. And they were cheap. Had to have the hardwood floors done. That took a while, and it meant I had to be away from the house, so I ended up having to go back up to the lake home for a weekend while that house aired itself out and I could walk on the floors. By that time, the house was completely empty, save for the suitcases that I had packed in anticipation that work was going to let me go. So it had my clothes, it had some musical equipment that I wanted to bring along, it had my camera stuff, or just, stuff that you would bring up, and some dog stuff, and a few food items, that kind of thing. I think I had a total of 11 suitcases, and I was able to check a suitcase with my firearm in it, rather than having to take that to the special place where you would have to take firearms if you wanted to bring them on an airplane. So that was nice. Anyway, so I had those all in one room, just kind of all put off in an area. And then like I said, I had an air mattress. I had an end table with my work computer and monitor on it, and an office chair, and a little TV that was on the floor. Actually, no, I didn't even have a TV. I was watching YouTube, or watching videos on my little laptop monitor. It was very sparse. It was as little as I could have in that house. Around middle of the month, I got approval to work remote, and I was like, woo, I can go. So after I got told I could work from home, it was crunch time. I had to finish up everything that the contractors were doing, so the floors had to get done, the painting had to get done, and they took their dear sweet time with the painting. I think they finished maybe a week before we were going to list the house. I mean, it was right up to the end. And then they wanted a good review from me. I didn't give them any good review. So the week before I was to leave, which was Labor Day weekend that year. We staged the house, all the fake furniture that goes in there, and I got rid of 2 cars. I got rid of my wife's car, sold it back to the dealership and took a hit. I sold my car back to the dealership and took a hit. That's also the car that she had hit a deer that somebody right in front of her had taken out. So I took a pretty big hit on that one. Yeah, so I don't remember the day, but it was Labor Day weekend, maybe Thursday or Friday before Labor Day weekend. I locked the house up for the last time. And it's kind of a sad moment. We had lived in that house for 7 years. We really liked that house. Now that we're back, we really wish we hadn't sold the house. So yeah, on the morning of whatever day it was, a buddy of mine came and picked me up bright and early in the morning, like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Loaded all my suitcases into his truck, loaded my dog into the truck, the dog I had still, into the truck, and off to the airport we went. We went and checked in all my luggage. I got in line and got through security with the dog, and then went to my gate and sat there. So now I'm truly on my way. The next video will be a breakdown of Aura's experience flying to Nome and her layovers and all that, and I'll tell you my experience. Mind you, again, this was during COVID, so things were really different. They were different for her because she was early COVID, and this was, when I went, was late August, early September. Things had loosened up a little bit, but not a ton. So it's interesting to see the difference from June to August of 2020 and how airports were treating COVID and such. So that'll be our next video. We'll do a breakdown of our travel to Nome. Thanks for watching.